Good afternoon. This is Anne-Marie Molinari with Train PD at T-Call again. And I just want to say hi to everybody. Hopefully you can see me waving. And I want to turn off my video camera now and say welcome. So I want to welcome you to, again, session 3 of the virtual conference. And our topic today, and I absolutely love this title. I think this is going to go down as one of the best titles of a session I've ever seen. This is Holy Hippocampus, How Adults Learn. And our presenter today is Liz Moya. And again, this is the Texas Adult Education and Literacy Instruction Virtual Conference. And I would like to introduce this beautiful, inspiring lady that we see right here. This is Liz Moya, and she's a professional development specialist at Train PD at T-Call, which is part of Texas A&M University. And I'd like to share a little bit of Liz's bio. With 20 years of experience in the field of adult education, Liz Moya has worked as an assistant director, professional development coordinator, curriculum specialist, teacher, student coach, tester, project manager, data specialist, course designer, conference organizer, and professional developer. She's done it all. Currently, Liz is the professional development specialist for Train PD at T-Call. In this role, she oversees, develops, and delivers professional development in the areas of program management, educational leadership, digital literacy, and she also is a policy guidance reviewer for TWC. Liz is a pro literacy nationally certified manager in program improvement. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Texas at El Paso. And this picture you see right here just happened, and she received her master's in education and training from Colorado State University. She has shared with me on numerous occasions that her students are her inspiration, and she is also my inspiration in many, many ways. Welcome, Liz.
Well, hello, everybody. That is such a nice, warm welcome. Thank you so much for choosing to join us today, and then on a Friday, no less. So props to you for being here today. Thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you to all the T-Call family for being here today. So let's get started with Holy Hippocampus, shall we? So today's session, as Anne-Marie said, it is Holy Hippocampus, How Adults Learn. And so today, this is what we're going to be focusing on. Our objectives are you will be able to explain how brain-based research affects learning, recognize stages of brain processing of information, identify methods to increase learning transfer to long-term memory. Sounds like a lot, but we're going to break it down for you. Before we get into learning about the brain, I wanted to share that we have some activities planned for today. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start off with a warm-up activity. So maybe you have some scratch paper next to you, maybe a Post-it note, or you can even use the notes section on your phone. If you don't have any paper next to you, that's okay. Just take a mental note, if you will. And so here's what we're going to do. I want you to take a moment to think about the time you learned how to drive. And for those of you who don't know how to drive, think of something that you learned. Maybe you learned how to cook, or maybe learning how to teach. But for this exercise, I'd like to focus on learning how to drive. Okay, so if you know how to drive, I want you to think back, and this is where that heart music would be playing, right? I want you to stop and think about the time when you were holding the steering wheel in your hands for that first time and you put that gear into drive. Now I want you to write down as many details about that moment. Include your thoughts and feelings. I'll give you about a minute to write that down. Again, just jot down the thoughts and feelings that come to your mind when you think of the first time you actually drove a vehicle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause for now, and you can continue with that reflection, and we're going to move on. Okay, here we go. So the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to use a poll to indicate the primary feeling from your first driving experience. You can only choose one emotion, and remember, there is no wrong answer. It's not a test, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and load that poll right now. There we go. So you can only select one answer. Select the one that best reflects your emotion of that day. So far, 50 people have answered. Great. We're almost at 50% of those that have responded. We're at 60%. Oh my gosh. Look at that. 100 people have responded. I know you can't see it. I can see it on my end. I'll show you in a little bit what that looks like. And so if you have the opportunity, use the poll rather than the chat. But if you put in the chat, that's okay. I just want to include your responses in the data. That would be very helpful. To log in your response, we're missing about 30 people that have not responded yet. I'm going to go ahead and share your results. We're going to be reflecting back on this. So if you look at the top portion of the poll, we have excited, happy, relieved, and calm. I'm going to group those together. So that's going to be a 42, 43, 44, 46% indicated something of a positive feeling. And then we have the other half, scared, worried, nervous, frustrated. And though that indicates almost the, another 48%, and then 2% indicated they don't remember, and that's okay. So I'm going to stop sharing the results. Hold on to that. We're going to reflect back on these results later. So it's 48% on each side, and then 2% that didn't remember. Okay, thank you so much for doing that. So in the meantime, let's begin with another little activity. We're going to do some kinesthetic activity to get acquainted with the structure of the brain. This will require the use of your hands, but do not turn on your video camera, okay? We're just going to be using your hands. So if you could please follow along, and this is what I would like for you to do. You're going to place your palms together, keep your fingers pointed to the sky, form a fist in each hand, keep your fingers and wrists, they should be touching one another, and your thumbs will be facing you. In other words, your thumbs are facing your eyes. Each of the fists represents a portion of your brain. Each one represents your left and right hemisphere. If you pull your fists apart where your nails touch, that represents the corpus callosum. In other words, when your nails touch together, that's the bundle of nerve connections that transmit messages between the two hemispheres. Look at one of your closed fists where the nails tuck into the palm of your hand. It looks similar to a C-shaped curve from your thumb to your little finger. So it looks like a little C shape. That is where the hippocampus lies inside your brain. You have two. So the plural is hippocampi, but I'm going to be referring to the hippocampus. And this is part of the medial temporal lobe. So the knuckles that are showing what Anne-Marie is showing you, that represents the medial temporal lobe. It is important that the hippocampus, that you know that the hippocampus is responsible for creating meaning to new information. Now, at the base of your palm, at about the size of your fingernail, the pinky, lies an almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. And the amygdala is really important because it is also critical in forming memories. So I'm going to be referring to the hippocampus, which is the C-shaped structure, and the amygdala, which is where your pinky fingernail is, okay? And now we're going to continue with the hippocampus and the amygdala. So there are two structures of the brain that we'll be focusing on today. This is shaped like a seahorse or C-shaped, like I mentioned earlier. The hippocampus serves as a security checkpoint for the memory processing center. When we have an experience, the hippocampus determines if this newly created experience is worth saving and goes and moves into the working memory, or if it gets dumped on the memory floor and just gets placed in the trash. If it has meaning to us, then it gets set along to long-term memory. The way it does this is by using a file system of sorts, kind of like a file cabinet, constantly checking to see if we have any associated memories to the new experience. If we do, then the new experience gets filed under that connection. Another way to think of this process is similar to the function of a magnet seeking to make a connection. Making connections or associations is vital to understanding. So without these connected experiences, the information gets dumped. When we think of the hippocampus serves as a function resembling that of a security guard or a bouncer. That's why I like this picture. He looks pretty mean looking. The hippocampus bouncer, if you will, is the gatekeeper to the creation of memories. It is continually seeking if the new experience has any meaning to us. So if you look at this chart, the information comes in through our sensory processing unit, our sight, how we feel, touch, taste, what we hear. And then the immediate perception, this is without even having any thought. It's our sensory perception determines, is this going to be meaningful to me? If it is, it gets processed down to a long-term memory. If it is not, it gets thrown out. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the amygdala. The amygdala, again, is that little structure that resembles your pinky fingernail. So the amygdala, as we learned earlier, it's connected to the base of the hippocampus. And the interactions between the hippocampus and the amygdala create the opportunity for higher likelihood of remembering events that are important and emotional. The amygdala controls the fight or flight response. It is constantly searching for threats, very much like Homeland Security. It seeks to identify anything that may be a danger. Researchers believe that the amygdala is responsible for encoding messages in the brain with emotions. When a memory is recalled, so is the emotion. So here's a little snapshot of what the amygdala means to me. So the amygdala serves as Homeland Security or a watchdog, similar to a Chihuahua dog, always monitoring for perceived threat. And just like a Chihuahua, if danger is detected, no matter how minute, an alert will be sent and the information will most likely be dumped. If the memory is created, then the information that gets connected to this memory will also share the same emotion. So what does this mean? This signifies the amygdala processes a memory wrapped in how it made us feel. One important thing to know is how that memory is encoded will determine how we feel about related associations. Think of it in terms of a student who dropped out of high school and enrolls in our adult education courses. Unless you do something to change how they feel about, school administrators, math, or test-taking skills, for example, they associate their old feelings to what you are currently doing. It is extremely difficult to rewire our memory and the emotion connected to it. So one way to address this is by identifying a learner's difficulties and challenges. Then we ask what approach they would have preferred to learning. What is the preferred learning style? This information is the gateway to building a relationship and trust. And of course, we always want to associate it to the learner's past, not the teacher's past, because the learner has no connection to that. But what does it mean to the learner? How does it connect to them? And when you do these things, that's how you can ensure that your amygdala and your hippocampus are in sync. So at this time, I'm going to pause for some questions, see what's going on in the chat. And Anne-Marie, you could let me know if there's anything I need to clarify.
No questions so far, just a couple comments about how true the information is. So we can move forward.
Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. So now let's look at the implications. This is just a little review of what we've covered so far. Learning transfer, in essence, is when information gets stored as a learned event. Okay. So that's what we've been talking about so far. There has to be meaning and emotion tied to this information. If the information is not saved, then when the student sees the same information, the brain will treat it and code it as if it's brand new information. I don't know if that sounds familiar. Maybe when you're teaching your class and you say, oh, let's review this grammar rule, and the teacher said, and the student says, I've never seen that before. And the teacher might say, wait a minute, we just talked about it last week on Tuesday. And so that's a clear indication that it was meaningless to the student and they didn't encode it in emotion. So you need to have those two items, the meaningfulness and preferably a positive emotion for it to get registered into your long-term memory. So at the start of this session, I asked you to think about a time you first learned how to drive. You were prompted to retrieve the details, including how you felt. So Anne-Marie, let me see, correct me if I was wrong. The percentages again were about 48% were positive, and then 48% were negative. Was that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am, with about
Okay.
2% in between.
Okay, so what I'm going to ask now in the chat, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to either state positive or negative, and then you're going to put a hyphen and give me a short phrase. Why was it positive? And if it was negative, why was it negative? Keep it short. You know, we don't need paragraphs here. Okay, so reflecting back on the same driving experience that we talked about earlier today, when you indicated in the poll that it was positive or negative, I want you to restate that in the chat pod, whatever answer you gave earlier. If you were scared, you put scared. Now tell me why you were scared. If you said it was fun, tell me why you thought it was positive. So that's what I'm looking for. Is that better?
Yep, and everybody is giving, you know, kind of all over the board, positive or negative, positive, excited but scared, positive mother supported me, oh, positive parent interaction, so kind of just all over.
So wow, 12 years old. Wow, that's an early age to start. So what I do see here in the chat, and I'm trying to see if you all see it as well, people who noted that there was a negative experience indicated something bad happened. They were nervous. It was the first time. Someone indicated they were on the freeway or the interstate. The car was a big machine and you were a small person. Yalinda says she was slamming on the brakes and barely touching the gas. So notice that it was a negative emotional feeling with a negative experience. And conversely, those who indicated a positive feeling indicated a positive result, meaning, so someone said they were negative and they were nervous and happy at the same time. Maribel, you're an anomaly, but thank you for sharing that. And so Denise Johnson says she was excited and it was a rite of passage. I'm trying to see some of the other positive. Bethany said it was, let me see, negative, both parents in the car at the same time, giving confusing instructions. Note to self, I won't do that to my kids. Let me see. Joyce Watson says it was positive because she was eager to learn. And Constance mentions it was positive for parent reassuring. So for what I'm trying to indicate here, that we have the apples to apples and oranges to oranges analogy. It's going to be rare that you will have a negative feeling despite the fact you had the most supportive parents, for example, or that you're going to have a positive feeling despite the fact you had a car accident. Does that make sense? So that's the point that I'm trying to make. And this is just an example of that. So Anne-Marie, you said you had a question?
Yes, we did. Hold on. They're coming in fast and furious. This was an excellent question. Can you offer a specific example of connecting something being taught to the student's past in order to make it memorable and meaningful? And that came up a while ago. I thought it was a great picture, great question.
Very much so, and I'm going to touch upon it in a couple of slides. I do have another activity, and I think maybe this will help a little bit. So if you can give me just a brief moment, and we'll get to that in a bit. Okay, wonderful. So here's another activity to address the same point. Okay, so get your fingers ready. We're going to do another kinesthetic exercise. So here's the prompt. Reflect on your best teacher. Okay, so think about that for a moment. Who is your best teacher or best professor? Okay, now that you have that person in mind, and only pick one, okay? If you have many, great for you, but only pick one. Now I want you to consider the emotions or memories associated with that best teacher, okay? So I'm giving you a moment to think of the teacher and think of the subject or the content that that teacher taught. Okay, so on one hand, on your left hand, you're going to indicate a thumbs up to represent the positive instructor, okay? That favorite teacher of yours. On your right hand, I want you to indicate either a thumbs up or a thumbs down to indicate the feeling you had about the course or subject that teacher taught. On your left hand, thumbs up for a favorite teacher. On your right hand, either thumbs up of how you felt about the course content or thumbs down about how you felt about that course content, okay? And so now I'm gonna ask you to use the participant reaction buttons. So you're going to click on participants. If it's not open already, click on the participants button. And I want you to indicate if your hands matched. Did you have 2 thumbs up? Indicate yes. If they did not match, then click no, okay?
Lots of yeses coming in, and they're using the green check too.
Perfect. Okay, so I do see 60 yeses, 3 no's, a couple of checks. Gosh, you guys are so great. You've been participating all along, and here's what we're trying to prove. More likely than not, this little experiment highlights that the likelihood is that your hands will match. Why? You have associated a positive emotion to a course content, most likely due to your teacher's approach to learning. Your hippocampus registered the event as meaningful, and your amygdala associated this as a non-threat, making it safe to learn. Future encounters with the same content will automatically be tied to the original emotion unless it is overwritten by a dramatic or traumatic event. So you could do the same for a worst teacher and see if it matches for worst content. Chances are they will most likely match. So for those of you who indicated a negative experience, I'm curious to know, I would bet money that if you had a bad teacher, you also think poorly of that subject or content area. So let's now go into the next segment where we're going to be exploring mirror neurons. Have you heard of mirror neurons? Probably not, but they mimic the experiences of others by recreating the thought and feeling as if we had that same experience. They're very valuable because they help us to understand others' emotions, and they also help us to develop empathy. Here are some other examples of recognizing your mirror neurons at work. Consider the feeling you get the moment you've been called into the principal's office, or worse yet, the boss's office. Without knowing if it's good or bad news, you immediately clench up and worry because you have built on others' bad experiences and developed them as your own. How about when someone yawns? Typically, when you see someone yawning, you'll yawn too. Oh my gosh, you might even be yawning right now. You really have to fight that sensation to yawn because that is what your mirror neurons are telling you to do. How about this other example? The tearjerker movies. Do your eyes tend to water when you watch that ending scene with Brad Pitt or the Titanic or the Notebook, and you are prompted with an action or feeling of what is going on in the movie? So can you think of any other examples? And put those in the chat. Anything that you see that makes you empathize. Oh, Bethany, yeah, she can relate to the Notebook. Lorraine says, stop the yawning. So any other examples that you can think of? Someone eating pizza. When a best friend cries, I cry. There you go. Yeah, Lassie or Bambi, when they cry, you cry. When your student cries, it makes you want to cry. Dancing, oh my gosh, that's my middle name right there. Ooh, the smell of popcorn. Michelle is saying, I wouldn't call it empathy, but when others around us are stressed or anxious, we feel it too. Yes, when you see a newborn, and I'm wondering what that means. If you see a newborn, does that mean you want to eat, cry, sleep, poop? Marco Antonio says, this might sound crazy, but each time I hear the song America the Beautiful, I get goosebumps. Okay, so one thing is the way you associate an inanimate object to a feeling, and that's what we were talking about with the relationship between the hippocampus and the amygdala. But mirror neurons are more about the physical activity that someone engages in, and then when you see that activity, then you have the sensation as if you're feeling it as well. So here's some other examples that I was thinking of. Let's say if someone starts eating, like someone mentioned pizza, then all of a sudden you're hungry. Not that you were hungry before, but now because you saw someone eating, now you want to munch on something. Or maybe you're watching some funny videos and someone sliding down a steep mountain or hill, and then you get that feeling like you're falling too, you know, that ugly sensation you might get. Or maybe you see someone walking into a haunted house and you're afraid before even walking in because you can already empathize with that same feeling. So that's mirror neurons. And so, man, I look at all these chat responses, music and dancing when you check old pictures. Wonderful. Man, you guys are awesome. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the learner connections. And I think this is a question that someone had earlier. So to maximize mirror neurons in the classroom, information needs to associate content to 3 markers. They need to be contextualized experiences. For example, an IET class becomes much more meaningful when you relate the math component to the actual welding component of the vocational training. Associate academic content to real life applications. And again, I'm going to use math because that's not my forte. Krista, of course, you know, she's a genius at math, but I have difficulty with that. And so it's helpful when you use math in a real life application, but in every single lesson, not just that hardest question at the end of the book, you know. And then, of course, the third one is developing scenario-based problems for students to solve. That way the student can develop those feelings, that emotion. And when I say feelings, I'm not talking about you want your students to cry. I want them to have feelings of maybe empowerment, feelings of having success, feelings of feeling accomplished when they're doing these activities in the classroom, whether it's role playing, acting something out, but definitely scenario-based problems will help your learners. So incorporating all 3 would be the brain's recipe for success. So how does this relate to our students? Sharing of others' experiences in the classroom has benefits to many. As educators, it is our duty to learn about our students' perceived barriers and find examples within their communities who have been successful and shared similar obstacles. Students need examples of those who have been LGBTQ marginalized, the underdog who created change among those in rural communities, the woman who took one of the highest seats in the nation, the man, despite his mental disability, made historic contributions to our financial systems, the youngest girl to ever receive the Nobel laureate, though she was denied a formal education, a dreamer whose creations were taken away from him, and probably the most significant of them all, the former student, the one who could relate the most with the rest of his or her classmates about the persistence and resiliency it took to reach their goal. Students unfamiliar with a specific emotion or context can learn by listening to the experiences and perceptions of others within a specific context. So I wish to leave this segment on mirror neurons and the amygdala with this quote. When classroom data show that there are patterns to which students we are not reaching, patterns predictable by race, class, gender, or home language, it can set off the amygdala upstairs. So in the chat, can you tell me what does that mean to set off the amygdala upstairs? I'm curious. I want to know if this quote resonates with you. And Anne-Marie, if you could let me know. What does it mean to set off the amygdala upstairs?
Memories, maybe.
Okay.
Makes them nervous. It might get upsetting. Warning, warning, this may hurt.
There you go.
Anxious brain. Flight mode. Here comes the bouncer. Bad connecting emotions, bad memories. A student perceives the interaction as negative. It's a threat. So I think they're getting it,
Okay,
aren't they?
wonderful, wonderful. And yes, and I think prior to associating an emotion to it, they're probably not associating meaning. If you talk about a famous person, for example, well, a student might say, well, they were born famous, or they had rich parents, or that's not me. So sometimes it's really hard to use a celebrity as an example, and that's why using classroom former students are probably the prime example. We can't even use ourselves as example because students already see us as intelligent, accomplished. They see the final product. We need to show them examples of people that started where they are at so that they can find that meaningful connection. So thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. Man, you guys are on top of things. So now I'm going to go ahead and pause to see if there are any questions.
Liz, there have been many profound ones, but this was a wonderful. Mine Jenkins says, past emotions that come back into focus. A good, bad,
Mm.
ugly, negative in between. So I thought that was very, very profound, mine. So let's see if there's questions. Everybody go ahead and put your questions there if you have any. I'm just looking at the comments to see if we pretty much got a summary of all of those.
I see Claire. She said, I love having former students come and tell how they did it.
So we can,
Okay.
I'll let you
All
know.
right. So I'm going to move forward, and I'm sure those questions will be bubbling up later on, and we can address those. So let's go ahead and move with another activity. I love activities. So earlier we discussed how the hippocampus serves as a security guard to checking if the experience is worthy of being saved to our long-term memory. So we're going to go ahead and do another poll and to check for understanding, okay?
Liz, can we
Yes,
hold
ma'am.
that? Do we have time for one question? It was an excellent
Sure.
question. And
Go
you
ahead.
may answer it, so we may hold it, Nabor. But Nabor says, how can you turn this natural phenomenon into a teaching benefit?
Based on the earlier question is how do we resonate with students? And when I used to have my ABE learners, I did a research study where I interviewed all my ABE learners and I asked them, why did you leave high school? What didn't work out? And I had a checklist, and they put teachers, administrators, a security guard, math, language arts, had to work, pregnancy, drugs. It was like a list, and then they would simply check it off. And then I would tell them, okay, now that, I don't know, depending on how long it had been since they were in school, I would ask them, okay, of those issues, how many of those you feel you see in a different light, or perhaps they've been resolved? And most of the time, a lot of those indicators have been resolved, but they still, like the content matter or their feelings about administrators or school personnel, remain the same. They still had a negative connotation about their teacher, their principal, their counselor. And when I probed further into it, I asked them why. Well, they're the ones that told me I should drop out of school. They're the ones that told me I would never amount to anything. They're the ones that always picked on me in school. So after I learned that information, I would provide lots of guided practice in the classroom so that they could feel supported. I would give them one-on-one individual attention. And then before having them present in front of class, I always ensured they had the right answer so that they were equipped of feeling successful. And little by little, they would start coming around, turning around and enjoying that content, whatever that content was. It wasn't easy. It took some time, but that was just one way, I think, of addressing the phenomena as you put it. Hopefully I answered your question. So let's do this poll and check for understanding, shall we? So here we go. There are 3 questions. You can only answer one answer per question. What is the purpose of the hippocampus? What is the purpose of the amygdala? And what happens to information that doesn't pass through the hippocampus and amygdala? So go ahead and start your responses. People are reading, trying to decide. So far, 10% have responded. So providing small, tangible moments of success is a way to change their mindset so it doesn't feel like a threat. It feels safe. And then it creates meaning. Once you get past safety, then it becomes meaningful to them. The first question is, what is the purpose of the hippocampus? That's the first question. Okay, and then the second question is, what is the purpose of the amygdala? Third question is, what happens to information that does not get past the hippocampus and amygdala? What happens to that information? So it says, what is the purpose of the hippocampus? And it checks for meaningfulness. That is the sole purpose of it. So 66% of you answered correctly. Yes, yes, yes. What is the purpose of the amygdala? Well, it monitors for danger or a perceived threat. So thank you so much for answering that. And then the third question is, what happens to that information that doesn't get by the security guard or the watchdog? And you were correct, it's removed from the working memory. Nothing goes into memory unless it passes those two guards. Has to pass the chihuahua, has to pass the security guard. So the purpose of the hippocampus is to check for meaningfulness, and the amygdala checks for a danger or perceived threat. Okay, and what happens if it's considered a danger or if it's considered not useful to us? We forget about it. That's what it means. Okay, so we're going to continue. So we talked about the processing of information, so there could be successful learning transfer, but only two functions are part of a much larger system that processes information. To process information, once it passed the security guard and the chihuahua, it has to do these three things. The emotions have to be strongly involved in the human processing, comprehension, and the creativity of any lesson that you provide. Now, your brain is constantly seeking something new. So you can only provide 10 to 20 minute chunks of information. That's why I already know that you're probably thinking of what's for dinner, or what you're going to do for the weekend, or you're trying to find a snack, or you're trying to go and check your email, because your brain can't help but want to seek something new. So it's critical that you chunk information in 10 to 20 minute segments. And then the learner must believe that participating in the learning situation will result in success. So it's time for demonstration once again. And I've been talking about math a lot. So now we're going to consider an ESL lesson where I'm teaching students how to learn a conversational dialogue. Okay? What I'd like for you to do is you're going to use your two hands, and anytime I do a learning activity, I want you to connect your fingers, beginning with your pointer fingers. Okay, and your fingers are representing dendrites. A dendrite, or a neuron, is where a learning event initiates, and anytime you make a connection, it forms a learning pathway with that neural pathway. So here's the first one. So my first lesson is teaching the students the dialogue, and this is represented by connecting our two pointer fingers. Okay, so I introduced the conversation. My next lesson is cutting up the dialogue into strips, and the learner has put the conversation in sequential order. Perfect. So now we have formed a stronger bond than simply doing that first conversation activity. We now use those two fingers to connect. Then I'll have a close exercise, a role-playing activity using that conversation, and the creation of a pamphlet. Use body language during that conversation. And then the last one, the culminating piece, would be to do a live demonstration of the dialogue with maybe another staff member or family member. So in the end, we would have our hands clasped together, representing how we have fortified that learning pathway. There you go, your fingers are intertwined. So when you do a drive-by lesson, as I call it, when you just introduce one lesson skill set and you move on, you are inhibiting your learners from truly understanding the meaningfulness. And they might understand it for that moment, but you're not creating a strong bond. And if Anne-Marie, when you show your clasped hands and try to pull your hands apart, that's a really strong connection. But if we only do one lesson activity, it's easy to pull apart. That means how easy it is to forget. Okay, so now we're headed into our third segment, which is on plasticity. The brain is a magnificent organ. It has the ability to store more information than the latest laptop, Google, or Apple has to offer. It also has the ability to rewire itself to learn new things no matter your age. In order to do this, however, the conditions must be right. So neurons tend to anticipate what you want to do based on your previous memory or creative path. This is called an engram. It forms like a little channel, and anytime it sees something related to that previous memory, it automatically wants to associate it to that. So let's say the first time you do something, let's say you balance on one foot. Your neural activity would look like a fireworks show in the evening sky with beams of light going off at random times. But the more you try to balance on one foot and you do it correctly each time, your neurons start firing in sync. The more experiences, the better the path. So here's something to try at home with your cabin fever family during this coronavirus time. And this is to simulate neural activity. What I would, not now, later, you know, when you're bored tomorrow or Sunday, gather your family around and have everyone clap for about 30 seconds. And you're gonna have all your family, everyone's clapping randomly, and do it for 30 seconds. I guarantee that by about the 15-second point, you're gonna find that every one of your family members is clapping in synchronicity. Why? That's how your neurons work. When you develop a path and every time you revisit it, your brain already anticipates what's going to come next. And that clapping activity is simulating or an analogy for that activity with your neurons. So try it at home and let me know if it works or not. The second thing is that these neurons develop from your sensory input. So every time you do an activity, you practice, or you're teaching others, all of these are building a stronger neural pathway. This means that if you teach something in August, it's best to review that skill set throughout the course if you want your students to continue using that skill. Now, there's a saying that practice makes perfect. That's not true, because how many drivers or cooks do you know? And let's say an Uber driver, and I'm not picking on Uber, but, or let's say myself, simply because you drive a lot or you've been driving for years doesn't necessarily mean that you're a great driver. Why? Because you didn't learn it correctly, or you just choose not to follow the rules. Take your pick. Same thing with cooks. I have my Instapot. I have to YouTube recipes because I know I need all the help I can get, despite the fact that I've been cooking for decades now. So that's why teachers should not plan for independent practice before doing guided practice, you know, where it's I do, we do, you do model. And so rehearsal is always the best indicator in preparing learners. So here we have another example to demonstrate how these neural pathways work. When I first started teaching, I did what I would call the drive-by lesson. That's when I would say things like, I taught you that on such and such date. Why don't you remember? In essence, whatever I had presented on that day might have been meaningful, and it made it past the security guard, AKA the hippocampus. And it might have even been fun and engaging to make it past the watchdog, AKA Homeland Security or the Chihuahua. But what I didn't do is I didn't create a strong pathway. I had failed to offer different ways of fortifying that skill set. Another way of thinking of it is a simple rope. I had created a simple pathway, made a connection earlier, but that memory retrieval is not that great. After lots of training and shadowing more experienced teachers, I learned that it was important to do multiple lessons on the same skill set with various levels of rigor and applying more than 2 learning styles. My end result looked more like I had created a superhighway of a learning pathway, complete with signs and lights and GPS system to help me navigate through that new learning process. When you consider that the learner has developed a strong neural pathway, it is similar to providing lessons that include how to identify it, write it, say it, draw it, act it out, apply it, and explain it to others. That's when you know you have created that strong neural pathway, otherwise known as a superhighway to process that information. So if I go back to my rope analogy, I might get excited when my students were able to retrieve a skill such as conjugating verbs, but all I had merely done was to create a simple pathway that would soon fade away. To create a stronger neural pathway, just like my superhighway, then I want to create a strong connection represented by a larger braided rope. Every experience, every lesson is meant to fortify and build upon that same skill set, just as Anne-Marie modeled with her hands. And so, before we part, I'd like to share the 4 reasons why adult learners seek our services. Here are 2. They seek to gain access to information and resources so they can orient themselves in this world. They also want action because they want to be able to solve their own problems independently without asking their children, their parents, their neighbor, their colleague for help. They also want to have a voice, feeling that they are contributing and that their ideas and opinions matter. In fact, the feeling that one is contributing something to others appears to be especially motivating, which increases the chances that the amygdala is going to say, go on up to long-term memory. So anytime you listen to your students and allow their opinions to be heard in class, productive opinions, those will lead to increased learning. And of course, the 4th reason is they want to continue learning based on the information that they've already learned so that they can make a contribution to their world. So in today's segment, these were the 3 objectives that we had today: explaining brain-based research, how it affects learning, recognizing the stages of brain processing information, and identifying methods to increase learning transfer to long-term memory. I hope and expect that you are able to name one brain-based fact from today's session and let me know how you'll connect that to your learner classroom. One thing you learned and how you're going to apply that in the classroom, please. And this is from Equip from the Future Content Standards. If you simply Google Equip for the Future Content Standards, you'll find lots of lesson plans and activities. Do a simple Google search and it'll come up. Lots of really great activities, and it also represents the 4 voices. Culture is important and an opportunity for students to learn, connecting experiences. All lessons should be meaningful but positive for students. Yay! Revisited skills and tools. Emotional security is important to learning. Thank you. Yes. More scenario. Someone said they're going to use more scenario-based learning. No drive-by.
There was a great one, Liz. Review, encourage, and connect. Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. Oh, yay. That makes me happy. Students may not initially remember the content, but they remember how you make them feel. Absolutely. And that's, you know, sometimes that's where you have to start, you know, especially with orientation, first day of class, or if it's orientation for remote learning, you want to make them feel comfortable. But rather than jumping into, this is how you're going to use Zoom or WebEx, you know, let's make them feel comfortable. How are you feeling about using computers? How are you feeling about studying at home? That alone allows the student to know, wow, you're listening to me. You really care. Oh my goodness. So I'm going to go ahead and share my email here in case you have questions, you want to reach out to me.
I want to thank Elizabeth Moya for being here this afternoon and doing this incredible presentation. I love it. I think I'm always going to remember the analogies that you used because they were perfect. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And I also want to thank the tech crew. Dr. Olga Escamilla has been with me since 8 o'clock this morning as a co-host. And we have had Beth Ponder, and we've also had Krista. And Krista did double duty today. So I just want to thank the incredible colleagues that I work with and say thank you to all of you. And I'm on behalf of Train PD, we thank you so much. Take care, everybody. And Liz, awesome job.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the Train PD staff, and then Anne-Marie, you were wonderful in organizing all of this and then helping me with all the kinesthetic activities. So thank you, thank you. Yes,
we're trying to make a heart. Can everybody see it? My hands don't work very well, guys, because I got arthritis. So I was stressing trying to do the...
So thank you very much, everybody.
All right, guys, take care. We appreciate you all. Keep up the great work. And as we like to say, AEL strong. AEL strong, everybody. Take care.
Yes, thank you.
AEL strong. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.